So we've got planets, but there were a few little touches that I wanted to add and one major problem that I wanted to address before I moved on. We'll start with the small things. So one thing that always annoyed me was how if you go down onto the planet and you look at the sky, you'll see that you can still see the stars, which that's not right. The stars should be obstructed during the daytime, and so I fixed that, and you'll see this is what it looks like now. And you can see it has a nice sort of gradual fading away. The way I did this was actually kind of, well, I don't know, you could call it hacky, or you could call it resourceful. Basically, there is a huge rectangle that is really, really far away from the player. And it has a shader on it, which sets its opacity based on how deep into the atmosphere of a planet you are. And it's as simple as that. So simple that it took me until now to figure out. You would not believe how long it took me to figure out something as seemingly simple as this. I think what I am slowly learning more and more as I learn how to use Godot is the power of shaders. They really are your best friend when you want to, make something look a certain way that can't just be done with a regular material. Another thing I did was add these clouds, and they look, well, they resemble clouds, at least a little bit. I tried implementing rain, but that ended up with some weird results, sort of sideways. I'm not really sure why. I used one of those particle generator node thingies, and it didn't really work. So, I don't know, maybe I could try just having have it like generate each individual raindrop as like its own entity. That'd actually be an interesting idea. It'd be more dynamic, but more resource intensive, of course. You can probably also tell if you watched the previous videos that the starting planet here it's smaller now. By having the planets be smaller, I can have the same amount of stuff on them, but at a higher density, making them feel less sparse. Also, since we're doing like a realistic physics simulation, the star systems are going to have to be pretty spread out, unless we want like them to, all the orbits to like collapse instantly. Meaning the smaller the objects, the better, because then the system itself can be smaller, and you won't have like super long travel times between different objects. Also, I added these little butterflies and flowers. That's just a nice little detail to make the world feel a little bit more alive. You can also see I'm now sort of going for a kind of retro, sort of like PS1 era art style that's sort of popular nowadays, and that I quite like, actually. And don't worry, I'm aware that there's some art style clash here. Some things look a little bit out of place. I'm not too worried about the art right now. Mainly, I just want it to be, somewhat presentable, and for you to sort of, enough that you can sort of get what I'm going for. I'll worry more about the art much later on in the project. But now let's get to the main issue, and that is the actual terrain of the planet itself. Up until now, I was using this tool made by Omberis, if that's how you pronounce that. That basically lets you make these nice little planets very easily. And it was very nice, and it worked very well. Only problem is, by default, these planets are just meshes. They have no collision. But no problem. I was able to add collision with just 2 lines of code. But an issue. You see, this kind of collision shape does not work with rigid bodies. I could use say, static bodies for the planets instead of rigid bodies, but a rotating, moving, static body planet, as it turns out, completely messes with any rigid bodies that are sitting on top of it. The physics engine, I guess, just doesn't really handle that. There's also other issues, such as there's not really a good way to add textures to the terrain. Everything just has to be a solid color, or gradients of color, which does not vibe with the sort of art style that I want for this game. Also, I haven't really found a good way to make it so that you'd be able to edit the terrain of a planet using this method, like in-game. And maybe I could figure out a way, but then maybe I could figure out a way to add textures to this. Maybe I could figure out a way to make the collision work. Like, ultimately it all comes down to my skill set, right? It's like, maybe I could figure out a way to do all of this. Maybe I could figure out a way to just completely make my own terrain, my own terrain generator or something. It's entirely outside of my skill set, and I could learn it, but this is supposed to be a survival game, and I haven't even hardly started implementing survival mechanics yet, or building, or making spaceships. So I said, you know what, this is a distraction. This is not a good use of my time, and I'm just going to find a way that's good enough. And so I created this sort of simple, it's very simple way of doing terrain. Basically, I randomly spawn a bunch of spheres inside the planet. And because it's so low poly, you almost can't even tell that it's like a bunch of spheres. I mean, you can in some cases, like, in some cases it's obvious, but I don't really think that's that big of a deal. Also, of course, adding textures is very trivial because it's just a sphere. You can just apply a spatial material to it. As for the collision, that's easy. You can just do a spherical collision shape, although that will cause an issue where, because the terrain is low poly, some parts of the collision shape will be like outside of the mesh and some will be inside of the mesh. So I can just make a collision shape based on the mesh itself. And this will mean that it actually has all of the bumps and edges and faces of the mesh in the terrain. As for terrain editing, I'm still sort of figuring that out. I'm thinking maybe when you mine each terrain node, it just sort of decreases in size. Although I don't know, that feels a little cheap to me. I'm really not sure. That's sort of something that's plagued me plagued my thoughts the entire time, is terrain editing, because there are really two options, and it's either height maps or voxels, or sort of pseudo voxels, which is what we sort of have right here. And they all come with their own trade-offs and benefits, and yeah. But yeah, I just sort of wanted to finish the planets, or finish them enough, rather, so that I can move on to the next thing. And yeah, that's that. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. It really helps out the channel. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.